Hi, this is Damien from AtHope, and I am an axiological atheist, which can be simply understood as a value theory or value science atheist. And I'm here with a very interesting guest. Could you go ahead and tell us your name and a little bit about you?
I'm Mary Alice Arthur, and I'm a story activist.
Wonderful.
And people ask me, what does that mean? And I say, well, first of all, I'm interested in story, how it works inside of human beings and between human beings, how we make sense and meaning of the world through the way that we're using our story lens on it. And the activism part is about, I'm really interested in what we're activating at the moment. What stories do we actually put the focus on? What are we deciding to pay attention to? And what's that creating for our future? And right at the moment, I'm involved in a really exciting thing called the Story of the Future Online Summit, which launches next Monday.
Wonderful. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've been in conversation for the last 2 years with two story colleagues, David Drake and David Hutchins. And David Drake is the founder of the field of narrative coaching. And David Hutchins wrote the book Circle of the Nine Muses. That's how to use story in organizational settings.
Cool. And
we've kind of been really sitting there saying to ourselves, hey, we're noticing a few things. Number one, the commodification of story. You could say the commodification of everything is happening at the moment. But story is being seen as a tool and an interesting thing. And so we were watching that going, hey, wait a second. You know, if you commodify everything, that means if it's a tool or a technique, you can go, okay, I don't like that anymore. Let's have something else new.
Yes.
But if story is the way that human beings make sense of the world, then that's an interesting thing to do to how we make sense of the world. So we began to get a bit concerned about it. And we've had the era of fake news and alternative facts. And, you know, there are a lot of people using story for influence. So the three of us in conversation said, okay, we see three waves. Story is influence, is the first one. A lot of people know about that. So there are a lot of people saying in organizations, oh, it's about the leader telling a better story or telling a different story. But, you know, there's so much more to storytelling than that. So when we were talking, we said, for us, the second wave is collective sense and meaning making. How do we together experience something and decide together what that means to us, and from that, where do we go with it? So that's the collective sense and meaning making part. That's my work. I do a lot of work like that. The third thing we think a story does incredibly well is healing and holding. So how do you work with the experiences you've had in your life, especially if you find those have been painful or even harmful? And how do we bring the fragmented nature of society, humanity, who we're being on this planet back together? So story does that too. So, you know, in thinking about that, last year I was asked to be a keynote speaker at a conference in Germany.
Yeah.
And I said those three things, yay. And then I decided to write a blog post about each one of them. So I wrote the first blog post about influence.
Wonderful.
I put it out on LinkedIn and 4,000 people read it, and I was like, oh, yay, go me, you know. Second blog post about collective sense and meaning making, 800 people read that, and at first I was like, hey, what happened? Third blog post, 200 people read that. And at first I got really disappointed, and then I went, no, I'm right. that actually directly mirrored what we were thinking of where the focus is for most people around storytelling.
Yeah, well, I agree, and that reminds me of something I liked when I took psychology in college. Was we learned about narrative therapy and about writing your own scripts, and about the idea that you can even do that. To me was very interesting, because I had already before that point had already kind of done that. I come from a lot of violence and gang area in California. And then now my life is about kindness. So I've had to like forget that old script, in a sense, and realize that I need to make the story of what I'm going to be, or what I'm becoming, or what I am, and what I'm trying to stay as, in a sense.
Yeah. So you've re-scripted yourself, because most often the story we're living in is the one we're living into. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds to me like you decided, hey, let's not go that direction, or I prefer not to. I prefer something different. So how do I actually change that for myself?
I did that.
Good on you.
And then I realized, as you were talking about storytelling, I realized we're all doing that. and that everyone keeps telling me a story that I can't change people, that I can't get to people, that no one can. And I realized, yeah, that's just a story we keep saying. That's not an actuality. We just keep believing it, and then every time we fail at changing someone or motivating someone or seeing the motivation, because sometimes we motivate people without realizing it, without an actual us, visual effect. Sometimes it could be 10 years later. I know I talked to one person that was a drug addict, and then like 4 years later, I saw her later, and she had her life all better, and she was so happy. I didn't even know I did that big of an impact. That just something I had said. So yeah, I know that we like immediacy, but I got the future. The future is not going to be immediacy. It's funny how we finances or even planning for retirement or something. People think about the future, like you were saying, and plan into it. But I feel like a lot of people don't do a story or don't even think of a future or a plan. They kind of just live in a moment, and then that moment becomes their whole life.
Or they're in that moment going, how the heck did I get here? And those moments come little steps. Most of the time it's like little steps, little choices, taking it on. But that starts, so a few things you said, part of our story starts well before we have any words. As children, we make meaning out of things that we can't possibly know about.
Yep.
Why have our parents decided to... What did I do that they're not together anymore? That might be a common thing a child thinks. And we do that because we're compelled to make meaning even at those ages when we don't know what words are doing. We make something in ourselves so that the world seems to make sense. And it's only later when we can unravel those kind of threads. But one of the reasons that story works so well is because when you get, there's a thing called entrainment. It's like you get on the train. Like if I'm telling a story and you're enjoying yourself, or you feel compelled by that story, then you're getting on the train with me. And scientists have shown that when we are entrained, the two of us are in the story literally together, because your brain chemistry will light up the same as my brain chemistry.
Right, the mirror neurons?
Yes. But also, the brain produces oxytocin.
Right. The bonding drug.
Yeah, it's like the community drug. It's like, and we love that.
We should hand it out.
Sense of belonging. Yeah. So, the best drug factory on the planet is right here. A bunch of chemical reactions are going. So, oxytocin is that one that makes us feel like we belong to something, that we're in the circle, that we're at home. We're home, deeply in our psychology and in our neurochemistry. We're at home when we're telling stories to each other.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. And to me, I can understand that totally, because we're emotional social beings. We're social beings, so we need the bonding. Then we're emotional that we feel the lack of bonding. But I think that's what motivates the bonding, is that emotional realization of the lack of social connection and the desire and the comfort that it brings.
Yes. So we get that kind of rush of all the emotions, like you said. So, what a story does, unless a human being experiences emotion, they're never going to take action. So on one level, head and heart mean hands do something.
Yeah.
So a story most often bypasses the head, goes right to the heart, and then makes something happen. So it can be a story that doesn't have a lot of truth behind it, but if it resonates with me, then it might stick with me for a long time.
Well, yeah, and some things that are not true can be beneficial. I think that, but I don't think that we should try for, I don't think that we should have denial therapy, but I do think that that not remembering the immediacy of your trauma and focusing on the benefits of the here and now, or in the possibilities of future, is a lot better than focusing on, the dark story, of someone's past. Even though you can't, in a sense, remove the dark postcards of your life, we don't have to keep flipping through them.
Yeah, you can't get stuck. A story can get stuck, and that's an interesting whole field of interesting thing to dig into. Is which stories are allowed to be heard? Who is allowed to be heard? And the challenge with the lifestyle that we have nowadays, which is very soundbite, very fast, is that, you need to give space to those things. If somebody has pain, you have to give space to it. And so it's not an immediate fix, and it's not an immediate, I'm going to listen to you and everything's going to be better, pat, pat.
Exactly.
Do I have the emotional resilience to be here and really listen in the way that somebody needs me to listen, and for long enough? So I was talking to some Native American or First Nations people in the West Coast. I was on a call and they asked me to talk about storytelling, which made me a little bit embarrassed. That's like what the British would call taking coals to Newcastle, because people from indigenous traditions most often have been brought up on stories.
Oh, definitely.
That's how you transfer the knowledge. And one woman on the call, and I could hear lots of pain in there. So one woman said to me, or said to us in the circle, I told my story and somebody immediately turned to me and said, that's not true. Because they hadn't experienced it exactly like that. And someone else said, my elder says to me, it will take 100 hours of listening in order for us to come to some reconciliation, and 99 of those hours should go to indigenous people. And I thought to myself, I would love to have an initiative called 99 Hours. If there's slow food, if there's the slow food listening, or the slow food movement, there must be the slow listening movement. So
I definitely think there's, even in anthropology, in a sense, doing stuff with indigenous tribes like ethnography is a wealth of things beyond just the stratification of the culture, but like you were saying, even beyond the religion or myths, but the people. Because this is people having, real experiences, in the environment that they're in.
Yes. Yeah. That's always how we passed our knowledge on. Anybody does that. So as human beings, we still story our world all the time.
Right.
But I like that idea of slow listening. And some of the speakers on the summit coming up starting next Monday have said to me, we like the fact that there are these things like the moth, where people are telling personal stories, but to really tell a good story takes longer than 5 minutes. So that question of how do we train ourselves again to be in the listening for long enough to actually make a difference.
Right, so you're saying that the storytelling is active on both sides.
Yes. Yes, the listener makes the story as much as the teller does.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think.
In fact, they have more power than they think.
Well, definitely. Well, because I even like people do a lot of nonverbal clues, so they think, well, I'm not doing anything, but they may do a lot. They may be smiling, joking, laughing, crying, moving their body, shaking their head, whatever. You can. I've done lots of speeches. You can physically see when, as you said, the train, when people are jumping on and then they're hooting and hollering and hanging off the edges, Yeah. Yeah, and suddenly, any good storyteller knows that even if they've told the same story again and again, it's never the same. Never. Because the audience is helping to make it every time. True, because the people around us are interacting with our saying it. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's interesting, too, is how people... They always think like that a movie, it tells a time, and they all, and stuff like that about they'll memorialize it in their mind. But generally, it's only for their culture, like you were saying about native peoples. If it's someone else's culture, like you said, it's easy to say it's nonsense or to say that's just irrelevant. Well, who cares what they think? Well, I mean, but. I think that ethnocentrism is really harmful even to us. Because once again, to me, we're social beings with emotional needs. And when we interact with people in that kind of an antisocial way of discounting them, we're really also discounting ourselves. And things mean different things over time, too. What meaning someone took out of looking at a building in the Middle Ages would be different than the meaning they take now. So it's the same with stories. But I'm thinking at this moment, as you're talking, about Aboriginal stories. In Australia, there are at least 4 levels of any story. And the very basic ones
seem like kids' stories, This is how Rainbow Serpent created the earth.
Right.
And it's not until a child begins to ask about what's behind the story that they actually get the teaching that is the next level. And then there comes the initiation to being what we would, I suppose, term a medicine person in other cultures. That you begin to get the other levels of something. So it comes across as being very simple. And I think even what we think of as very simple folk tales or fairy tales or folk mythology actually has much more meaning embedded in it than we know at this point in time.
I agree. and doing all my research, I've learned a lot. In fact, recently I started picking up on the fact of the star worship. The sun being the male at a certain point, sometime after 7,000. 7,000 years ago to 6,000, sometime in that point, it went from almost only goddess and animals being worshipped to all of a sudden this male, deity. And it does relate big time to the sun. And even at 6,000, sun worship was still, in a sense, a lot of it was connected to females. But it was interesting to me, like you said, how things changed and how the female then became the moon. And then males became the sun. And you see this in the yin and the yang, the rising, and the light is the male, and the descending and the dark is the female. And to me, it really relates to the sun and the moon, in Chinese mythology, But it's funny how then things change. Then we forget that it even was attached to gods and goddesses, and then it's just yin and yang means this and that, dark or whatever. But there's the whole, like you said, story that kind of started it is gone, and then it's just, it's about balance. Or it becomes like an esoteric thing's different than it even started at. In a sense, though, it's still referencing those other ideas, but it's now being used, I guess, differently.
That's why I think probably one of the most important tools anybody could use if they want to be awake in this world is curiosity.
Being a free thinker, open mind, and really willing to investigate. Because I think there's, like you said, about sometimes it's a lack of willingness. I know when I first started, I didn't want to learn about anything that didn't have to do with the major world religions in my studies. And then I started realizing, then I'm the one that's not educating myself fully. If I want to say understand, I can't possibly do it that way. And it was real hard at first because I didn't want to learn shamanism. But the more I learned, the more I kept going, wow, this is a really old religion. This is like 30,000 years old from Siberia and moved with the native peoples. And but so it changed. And all of a sudden I had once again, the story that I had, what I thought. I had to kind of go, okay, I need to back that way up and think about it totally different. And that helped me, though, because the shamans see, at least in Siberia and ancient ones, the stars connected to animals' antlers. And then that helped me understand how animals could be in the stars, because ancestors are stars. You look in the heavens, all the blinking lights, and some quadrants are your ancestors, glowing in a sense. But it was the shamanism that helped me understand paganism, not the other way around. So it was that openness to the stories of other people, because before I wouldn't even think about them. But then I started reading them, and the more I started reading them, I'm looking at the newer ones and going, oh, wait a minute. So that was really helpful to be open like that.
Yep, so curiosity. I mean, the interesting thing about curiosity for me is that if you can learn how to practice it, then on one level you're never flummoxed. You're never in a corner because you're going to go like, really? I'm really curious about that. Exactly. In fact, my favorite interviews use that kind of wording even. I'm really curious about ... And that's a really good way to elicit a story, actually.
That's good to know. So, could you tell us what inspired you to get into doing this? You said you wrote some articles. What inspired you to feel the desire to write the articles?
Well, I wanted to kind of bounce that idea out there. These blog posts were about the idea of influence, collective sense of meaning making and healing and holding. So I wanted to kind of put that out there after the response of the conference and see what people thought. And so I really kind of did a litmus test, I suppose, on the business world, if I take LinkedIn as being a cross-section of the business world, and said, they really are interested in influence. And they're not very aware of the other things. That's kind of fascinating. And when we look at what's come out of our thought process, which is this summit, we had 4 reasons we wanted to do it. And the first one was community. There are people doing storytelling all over the world, but they don't know each other.
Right.
So the professional storytellers know each other, and the organizational storytellers know each other, and the research and evaluation people know each other, and the entertainers know each other, but it's not like there's a lot of cross-pollinizing going on. But what if there were? Number 2 is I do a lot of participatory practice work, so a lot of how does group process help people stay together in conversations that really matter? And I've brought storytelling to that. So I have a lot of young people who say to me, I want to learn storytelling, but I haven't got any money. And so how do we help people be inspired easily? Number 3, we're calling co-creation. That is, how do you help people deepen their practice and realize it's about more than just how do you tell a story. There's so many more things you could look at. And number 4 is we're calling stewardship, which is how do we really make a place where people can come into community together and be in that conversation about what's the future story of story? Where are we going as humans? So those are the reasons, and I think this has been one of the most challenging but joyful projects I've ever been part of.
Wonderful. It sounds great. I think it's more important than probably people realize. And like I said, especially because of learning about narrative therapy and the power of narrative in general, it gave me a lot larger respect for stories. They really, your story is like your roadway. You can't go further than your story tells you can. Even if everything might be there that's possible. Right, self-limiting. You can tell somebody till you're blue in the face, you have all of this potential. But if they don't believe it, if their story isn't saying that, then, their story is saying these people are the bad ones, or these people are dangerous, or, any of that kind of stuff. Well, I think that what you just did right there is a story. In other words, I didn't mean that you made it up. I meant that you're doing it. You're giving me imagery. So you're giving me imagery to understand. And I think that that's also, to me, something that I try to do is use narrative in a sense. I didn't think of it as story, but I was thinking of a narrative, but because of the thing. But using my narratives as a way to help inspire people to think in their own self. So, in other words, using story as a tool, just like you were doing, using a tool of understanding by using it as a way of giving a larger explanation to things that could be confusing or not understood. Yeah, and stories can do that. They can make really complex things more understandable. They can offer a doorway for people to experience something rather than just be told about it. True. They can do a lot of things. So, for me, a key quote I like very much from Martin Shaw, who is also somebody who's worked a lot in mythology, is the business of storytelling is not about enchantment. The business of storytelling is not entertainment. The business of storytelling is waking up. And I think that that's something that a story gives sometimes both people, the one who's speaking and the listener, gives them, like a shared connection that almost empowers them. Because if like you were talking about, if someone hears a story that really is connecting and inspiring, it's inspiring because, in a sense, it's told in a certain way. If we just read words and they were just the facts, in other words, without story, just like a tally sheet, it would not be the same effect. It would not elicit the same response. But if we read it in a story and we feel this emotional social connection that does allow us to get more out of it than just the facts. Yeah. And people who work in NGOs figured that out. When they figured out they could tell us until the cows came home about how many children are impacted by food shortage, but until they tell us the story of one child we want to care about, right? Will we take action? That's why I think in the world of climate change, the climate is so big.
we haven't got a good story around that about how we're connected to it enough to really say we're going to do something.
Yeah. So this convention you're having, your goal of the convention is then, I guess, besides just the convention itself, is to then do more conventions, or to build more of a network, or because you said this is the first one, right?
Yeah, so it's an online summit. It's free, so anybody can come and join in and listen to all the speakers. And
anyone listening, I'm going to give links to that, so if you want to be involved.
Thank you for that, Damien. So people can come and listen. There are people out of a wide variety of fields, so all the way from professional storytellers to people who work in organizations to people who are in the film industry or do research and help disabled kids, and lots of different aspects, which are really exciting, I think. So that's a free possibility, and then we're just going to ask people, what do you think we should do next? Because this is all about how do we find each other as a tribe and stay in conversation.
Sounds good. Well, I hope that it goes well, and I do like the subject, and I do think that that we do need to see the value of narrative and stories, because it's beyond just being a cultural thing. To me, it's just a social thing in general. That we tell stories, even if it's going back to the truth or not, even if it's true stories. It's still like if I told you facts about the sun, or you watch a enjoyable documentary where they tell you a lot of fun things about it. It's like a story. You're not only gonna remember it more, it's gonna be more rewarding in general. Yeah. Because that's how this works. The brain is coded to remember stuff in story form. Yeah. So, and in fact, that reminds me that I think it's Carl Rogers says that all children, in the sense that they learn best through play therapy, and I think that goes back to the same type of a thing. That story is us playing, in a sense, with ideas because generally a story is presented creatively. It's not just I went here on Tuesday. And they're not just a litany of facts. Exactly. It's giving the human element, because a good story, as you were talking about, to me, is also done from people that are good orators. Because some people, in a sense, could get up and tell a story and it not be that great. Someone could tell the exact same story that bombed, and yet it become a good story. Same with comedians. You can have someone come out, tell one joke, have 10 other people, it's all terrible. One person does it, everyone laughs, enjoys it, it's fun, gets it because of how it's done. So I think that beyond, like you said, words, as you said, we started before we get words as stories, that I do think that we also do a lot of nonverbal clues with each other. And so some of that, how tone, phrase, speed, all impacts how other people take stuff. Yeah, but since we're all storytellers, because we're all humans, the way you get really good at it is practicing, which is what a comedian does. They practice and practice and practice. Exactly. Until they've got it down and they can deal with the hecklers and they're there. It's the same with storytelling. So anybody can do it, anybody can get good at it. And anybody can become awake to it. That's the cool thing. Cool. So do you have any story that you like to share that you would like to share now, or just wondering if you have any? Well, what I want to say, though, I want to make the difference between what I call a big S story and a little s story. Okay. So I was in Oklahoma City, and we had a storytelling conference, interestingly enough, and we listened to some stories from people who'd been in the Oklahoma City bombing. Mm. And one of them stays with me very much, because she started out by saying, "It was a beautiful day. It was a beautiful day." And I, who've been in a tragedy, have talked to many others who've been in tragedy, and many of those stories start with the same sentence: "It was a beautiful day." Hmm. And this particular woman was somebody who was standing at the whiteboard in her boardroom, and at the moment the explosion went off, turns around, there's a hole in the ground, and everyone who was in that room disappeared. I mean, it was, you can sit there like that. So that's what I call a big S story.
the plane fell out of the sky. There was a tsunami. I was in the earthquake. I rescued the child. And oftentimes we think those are the only ones that count. But the little s story of how you dealt with your depression that day, how you decided to be kind, because I know that's the theme for you.
It is.
How you decided to breathe a moment instead of reacting. How those little s stories about how we be good humans actually can make all the difference to somebody else. And so I just want to encourage everybody who's listening to please practice your little s stories of share that moment of the real you with somebody, because that connection could make all the difference in somebody's life.
I agree. And that's why I like having real chats with people, because I like to have real content. I really want to make a difference in the world. I want to do as much as I can. And I know that I can't do it alone. I realize we rise by helping each other. And that's a story that I started telling myself. Instead of seeing, because I used to see the world as everyone's against me. Then I changed that completely, and I said, no, I need, because I thought, no one's a friend. So I realized, well, then I need to start being a friend. No one seems to care, and so I realized, okay, then I need to start valuing others. I realized that no one seems, to be friendly and listen like you were talking about, or to act like as if ideas or who you are matters. And so I started really trying to value others in a way I had just never even thought of. And then I have another thing, that whenever someone attacks me, is mean to me, is unfair to me, instead of simply wanting to lash out, I take that as a call, a reminder how important it is to be kind, how much I need to be generous, how much I need to be understanding, how much I need to be thoughtful. So they tell me the story to remind me, because I can forget, wow, is there anyone around me that I could be treating better? It reminds me, one time my wife said to me, why do you still say thank you? We've been married for 10 years. I say thank you for all kinds of things.
Good
I said to her, how much can we take away and it still be a good marriage? Is the goal to take away as much as we can, but to still have a marriage? Because that's not my goal. My goal is to have flourishing abundance. Abundance of life, abundance of joy, abundance of connection.
I want to say thank you for that, because my dad died last year. He was 94. And for a long time, things were kind of tense. My dad had macular degeneration when he was, for the last 20, 30 years of his life. And he was a bad backseat driver, still responding to my mom, even when he couldn't see in front of him.
Yeah.
So it drove her nuts. There was a tension between them that meant I could only ever come for like 2 days or 3 days, because I just, got to the point I couldn't handle it. And then one day I went there and something had changed. And I got my mom alone. I said, what's going on? And she said, he learned how to say thank you. So, for me, for, a guy over 90 to learn something new, and that made all the difference, that little thank you. So I applaud you. And may we wish our listeners a lot more thank you out there. Please and thank yous are good.
Yeah, and I realize that I want to be, as much as I would put people down if they do things wrong, I want to build people up if they do things right. And it's just, instead of, I realize that if I spend all my time only pointing fingers, I have wasted time that I could have used helping hands. And it's that mindset. It's not that only one, but it's to realize that not only one.
Well, I'm really happy to hear how you've shifted your storyline. That's really great. And thank you for allowing me to share mine here too.
I appreciate your time. Anything else that you want to share? And you can give me links. Did you say you're an author? You wrote a book?
I haven't. I've written blog posts and things like that. But if you want to see what we're doing on the Story of the Future online summit, you just need to look up storythefuture.com. And that's where we are. And you'll find links to me in that too, and to my colleagues. And we'd love to see you in the circle and hear you in the circle.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye, and I appreciate your time. And
thank you very much.
It's been fun. And we got some good stories.
Yay! Bye, everybody.
Bye.